Europe could die. That was one of Emmanuel Macron's key warnings on Thursday in a landmark speech at the Sorbonne University in Paris. The French president's rallying cry involved a range of topics, including Europe's cybersecurity, relations with post-Brexit Britain, Russia's continued invasion of Ukraine, and Europe's challenges faced with major competitors who play by different rules.
There is an immense risk of being weakened or even relegated because we are at an unprecedented moment of upheaval in the world. Major change is happening faster, and so my message today is simple. We have to be clear on the fact that our Europe is mortal, it can die. It can die, and it depends solely on our choices, and we have to make those choices now.
So Europe is mortal. Let's turn now to our European Affairs Editor Armen Georgian to elaborate on that speech. Armen, it's quite a resounding notion to say that Europe could die, but was it necessary for Macron to go so hard?
Well, he has this dramatic turn of phrase sometimes, Jean-Emile. It reminded me of when he said that NATO was on the verge of being brain dead. A lot of people said that that wasn't actually the case, but he has this kind of turn of phrase sometimes, partly to generate a headline, obviously, we're talking about it now, but also to kind of jolt other European policymakers into action, and particularly into building on the joint European initiatives, which have increased since the COVID pandemic, the joint procurement of vaccines, now joint procurement of weapons for Ukraine, all the joint defense initiatives that are happening right now. I think in principle, other EU leaders would agree with Macron that these things should be built on, but they have different ways of doing that. So to give you one example, one of the things he talked about a lot was defense in this speech, and he mentioned made in Europe or by European, right? So this is the idea that instead of giving money to Korean weapons companies, we should make our own weapons in Europe and supply them to Ukraine. There are other members of the EU who look at that and think, well, why don't we just be practical and do whatever gets Ukraine the weapons it needs right now, instead of this, what seems to them sometimes like a slightly doctrinal approach by Macron to, European sovereignty and autonomy. Not that they think those things are wrong, but it's just that they don't necessarily have, what I've sensed anyway, listening to other EU leaders, they don't necessarily have this really kind of integrated view of all the different EU policies that he clearly has, and that we saw in this speech, the way Europe's defense policy is so closely tied to its industrial policy, which is tied to its research and innovation. He has this very integrated view, and I'm not sure that I've heard that much of that from his EU colleagues.
And obviously also referencing the economic situation, cybersecurity, relations with post-Brexit Britain. But now this speech was billed as Macron's EU strategic agenda contribution, basically. And it also comes just a couple of months before those crucial European elections. How effective do you think this will be in terms of a rallying cry to possibly propel his Renaissance Party, maybe even ahead of those?
Well, he's in a difficult position in the European elections because his rivals, his main rivals, the National Rally, are now about 13 points ahead in the polls. So that's a much bigger margin than in the 2019 elections, when the far right only just got ahead of Macron's party. There's a much bigger gap this time. It wasn't meant to be an election speech, but of course there were some elements of the election in it, when he, for example, had that swipe about the far right saying that they wanted to live in the European house without paying the rent. I don't know whether that really sort of shifts boundaries, though, Jean-Emile, in the sense that you've already got, the polls are pretty clear. There's a lot of people who are not planning to vote in the European election. Turnout is likely to be around 44% only. And if you look at young people, the IFOP polls say that 2/3 of young people aged 18 to 34 are not going to vote at all. They're not planning to vote. I'm not sure whether one of those 2/3 of young people aged 18 to 34, if they even listen to a speech like this, would they be motivated to A, come and vote, and B, to vote for Macron's party? I have serious doubts about that. But it's possible that with this speech, Macron was perhaps trying to sort of boost or get his own base at least more motivated, because you can bet on one thing, which is that his opponents are very motivated. The National Rally, they know that they don't have much chance in the second round of a presidential election in France, but they very much do have a chance to come out on top in the European election on June the 9th, and so they're going to be very motivated to go out and vote on that date.
It will be very interesting to see, of course, those results and those elections coming up. Armen, thanks as always.